5 words of love, 5 words of grief, and then silence. That statement was released to the press on July 18, 2024, the day the world learned that Christina Sandera had died at 61 years old in Carmel by the Sea, California. Clint Eastwood, the man who directed some of the most emotionally devastating films in the history of American cinema. The man who built an entire career on characters who never explained themselves, never asked for sympathy, and never broke, gave the woman he had loved for 10 years exactly 5 words of public mourning. And then he went back to the silence from which he had always operated. He was 93 years old when he lost her. He is 96 now. Behind the legend of Clint Eastwood, 96 years lived, 40 films directed, 5 Academy Awards, a career that has outlasted entire generations of Hollywood, lies a story that does not belong to the screen. It belongs to a quiet house in a small coastal town, to a woman most of the world barely knew existed, and to the kind of grief that a man of iron discipline carries not in public declarations, but in the weight of his silence. The question no one could answer after July 18, 2024, was not whether Clint Eastwood would survive the loss. He is, as his son Scott would later confirm to People magazine, a survivor and a trooper. The question, the one that follows a 93-year-old man who has outlived 2 marriages, a decades-long relationship, and now the companion of his final chapter, is what survival actually costs at that age, and what it looks like from the inside. If Clint Eastwood has ever made you believe that strength and silence are the same thing, hit like as a tribute to the last monument standing in American cinema. Because what happened after Christina Sandera died is not glamorous, but it is the most honest story Clint Eastwood has ever lived. It was a Thursday in July when the news broke. No press conference, no appearance, no statement read aloud by a publicist in front of cameras. A single line, released through the Warner Brothers communications office, confirmed what the people closest to Clint Eastwood already knew, that Christina Sandera, 61 years old, had died that morning at their home in Carmel by the Sea, California. The Monterey County Health Department confirmed the cause: cardiac arrhythmia, with atherosclerotic coronary artery disease as a contributing factor. Her death was natural. Her death was sudden. And the man who had shared her life for 10 years received the news the way he has always received the hardest moments, without a camera present and without an explanation to offer the world. Clint Eastwood's daughter, Morgan, was the first to speak publicly. She posted a tribute on Instagram describing the loss as a devastating loss. Those 2 words from a daughter said more about the depth of what her father was feeling than any press release could have managed. Because Morgan Eastwood knew what Christina Sandera had been in her father's life. Not a public figure, not a co-star, not a name attached to a red carpet. A companion, a presence, the woman who had been beside him through the final decade of a life that most men never reach, and almost no man navigates with the clarity that Clint Eastwood has always demanded of himself. And then there were Eastwood's own 5 words. Christina was a lovely, caring woman, and I will miss her very much. That is the entire public record of Clint Eastwood's grief. No interview, no follow-up statement, no retrospective tribute posted months later. 5 words of love and 5 words of loss. And the full weight of a 10-year relationship compressed into a single sentence that most people read in under 10 seconds and moved past. Those who understand how Clint Eastwood communicates understood that those 5 words were not brevity. They were everything. He has never been a man who explains himself to an audience waiting to be moved. To understand what Clint Eastwood lost on July 18, 2024, You have to understand how he found her in the first place. And the answer to that question is the kind of detail that reveals everything about the man. Because it was not glamorous, it was not orchestrated, and it involved no publicist, no industry event, and no carefully managed introduction between two names of equal magnitude. Clint Eastwood met Christina Sandera at work. His work. She was a hostess at the Mission Ranch Hotel and Restaurant in Carmel by the Sea, a property that Eastwood himself owns, a landmark he rescued from demolition in 1986 when he purchased it and renovated it rather than allow the city to lose it. He has always been that way about Carmel, protective, proprietorial in the best sense. The town is his, and he is the town's, and the Mission Ranch is perhaps the purest expression of the life he chose when Hollywood excess offered him everything, and he quietly declined most of it. Christina was not a celebrity. She was not an actress angling for proximity to a legend. She was a woman of the community, working a job in a restaurant owned by a man who happened to have directed some of the most significant films in the history of American cinema. The dynamic could not have been more asymmetrical on paper. In practice, it appears to have been something far simpler. Two people who found each other in a place they both already belonged to. They began dating in 2014. The timing matters. Eastwood had finalized his divorce from Dina Ruiz, his second wife, married in 1996, just 1 year earlier, in 2013. He was 83 years old when he and Christina became a couple. 83. An age at which most men have already written the final chapters of their personal lives, have already accepted that the great loves are behind them, and that what remains is maintenance and memory. Clint Eastwood, at 83, began something new. That alone tells you something about the man that no biography has ever fully captured. They were, from the beginning, aggressively private. There were no coordinated media appearances in the early months, no strategic leaks to entertainment press, no carefully framed paparazzi photographs that exist only because they were permitted to exist. The first time the world saw them together publicly was at the Academy Awards ceremony in 2015. When American Sniper, the film Eastwood had directed the previous year, was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. They appeared on the red carpet together. Christina wore a black gown. Eastwood stood beside her the way he stands in every frame he has ever occupied, as if the space around him exists to accommodate him, not the other way around. It was their public introduction to the world, and it was also, in the most Eastwood manner possible, a statement without a statement. She was there. She was his. Nothing further would be explained. In the years that followed, they appeared together at the premieres of Sully in 2016, The Mule in 2018, The 1517, To Paris in 2018, and Richard Jewell in 2019. 5 public appearances across 5 years. For any other figure of Eastwood's stature, that would be called inaccessibility. For Clint Eastwood, it was something closer to fidelity, to the idea that a relationship belongs to the two people inside it, and that the camera does not have a seat at that table unless it is invited. What did 10 years together actually look like between a man of Eastwood's history and a woman of Christina's quietness? That is the question worth sitting with before moving forward. Because the answer is not what most people imagine when they picture a Hollywood legend in his final chapter. There is a version of Clint Eastwood that the public knows with complete confidence. The squinting gunfighter, the uncompromising director, the man who talked to an empty chair at a Republican National Convention and somehow made it feel like the most Clint Eastwood thing he had ever done. That version is accurate as far as it goes. But the version that Christina Sandera knew was the one that existed after the cameras stopped and the crew went home and the legend walked through the front door of a ranch property in a small coastal California town and became simply a man living his life. Carmel by the Sea is not Beverly Hills. It is not Malibu. It does not attract the kind of celebrity that requires security details and tinted windows and restaurants that close their back doors to manage arrivals. It is a town of roughly 3,000 permanent residents, situated on the Monterey Peninsula, where the Pacific crashes against cypress-covered cliffs, and the fog comes in low and cold off the water every morning. Clint Eastwood served as its mayor in 1986, an act that was treated as a novelty by the press and as a straightforward civic responsibility by Eastwood himself. He won. He served. He did not seek re-election. He remained. The town has been his real home for decades, and it was the home he shared with Christina for 10 years. Their life together was quiet by design. Not quiet in the way that wealth enforces quietness. The gated community, the private beach, the insulation of money from the noise of ordinary life. Quiet in the way that two people who have both, in their different ways, already made their peace with what the world outside demands of them. Christina was not a woman seeking a spotlight she had never possessed. Eastwood was not a man performing humility. He has always been constitutionally indifferent to the machinery of celebrity maintenance. Together, they appear to have created something genuinely uncommon in the world they inhabited, a private life that was actually private. The Mission Ranch was their center of gravity. Eastwood owns it, manages it in the particular way that men of his generation understand ownership, as stewardship rather than investment, as a responsibility to a place rather than a calculation about its return. Christina had worked there. The property connected them before romance did, and it remained the connective tissue of their shared daily existence. A restaurant, a hotel, a working ranch with sheep grazing in the meadows behind the main building, with a view across the wetlands toward Point Lobos and the Pacific beyond. It is, by any measure, one of the more extraordinary settings in which an ordinary life has ever been lived. And the life they lived inside it was, by all available accounts, extraordinarily ordinary. They did not appear on talk show sofas. They did not give joint interviews about the secret to their relationship. They did not use each other's names as currency in the promotional cycles that define the public-facing half of Hollywood existence. When Eastwood walked red carpets during the last 5 years of their relationship, for Sully, for the Mule, for Richard Jewell, Christina was beside him in the photographs and absent from the interviews. She stood where partners stand. She did not perform the role of partner to a legend. The distinction matters enormously, and it is the distinction that made her presence in his life mean what it appears to have meant. It is also worth pausing here to place Christina's death inside the longer arc of loss that Clint Eastwood has navigated across the final decade of his life. Because July 18, 2024 was not the first time that grief arrived in his personal circle through a cardiac event in someone he had once loved. Sondra Locke, the actress who had been Eastwood's companion and creative partner across 14 years, whose relationship with him had ended bitterly and publicly in the late 1980s and had eventually reached something closer to resolution, died on November 3, 2018, at 74 years old, of cardiac arrest following a battle with cancer. Eastwood and Locke had not been together for decades by that point, but she had been a defining presence in the years when he was forging the directorial identity that would eventually produce Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby, and the body of work that secured his place not just as a screen icon, but as one of the genuine artists of American cinema. Her death, in 2018, was the first of the two losses. Christina's death, in 2024, was the second. 2 women. 2 cardiac events. 6 years apart. And a man who was already, by the time Sandra Locke died, in his late 80s, navigating the accumulated weight of a life long enough to outlast nearly everyone who had mattered inside it. He has been married twice, to Margaret Johnson, from 1953 to 1984. 31 years. To Dina Ruiz, from 1996 to 2013. 17 years. He is the father of 8 children by 6 different women. He has loved, by any honest accounting, with the same intensity and the same eventual incompleteness that defines most long human lives. The difference being that his incompleteness has been catalogued and debated by a public that has always found his personal life as compelling as his professional one. Christina Sandera was not a chapter in that catalogue. She was something different. She arrived in the final decade. She stayed through the making of his last confirmed film. She was there for the years when the body begins its longest argument with the will that has always overruled it. And then she was gone, suddenly, on a Thursday in July. And the man who has spent 96 years refusing to explain himself to anyone had nothing left to offer but 5 words and the silence that followed. What that silence actually contained, what it cost him physically, what it took from the architecture of his daily existence, is the part of this story that the press reported in fragments but never fully assembled. There is a particular cruelty in the timing of Juror No. 2's release that no one in the press quite named directly when it happened. The film arrived in theaters in November of 2024, 4 months after Christina Sandera died. It had been shot before her death. The editing, the scoring, the final post-production decisions that transform raw footage into a finished film, all of that work had continued through the summer and into the fall, through the weeks and months when Clint Eastwood was doing whatever a 93-year-old man does in the immediate aftermath of losing the companion of his final decade. The film was completed. It was released, and the press, almost universally, received it with a particular kind of reverence that had less to do with its merits as a legal thriller and more to do with what they believed it represented. They called it his farewell. Not in those exact words, in most cases, but the framing was unmistakable. The retrospective profiles, the career overview pieces, the critical assessments that spent as much time cataloging what Eastwood had given to American cinema across 7 decades as they spent analyzing the film itself. Juror No. 2 was his 40th film as a director. 40. A number that, when placed beside a career that began with Play Misty for Me in 1971 and moved through High Plains Drifter, The Outlaw Josie Wales, Bird, Unforgiven, The Bridges of Madison County, Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, Letters from Iwo Jima, Gran Torino, American Sniper, and Sully. A number that, against that list, carries a weight that is difficult to hold in a single thought. 40 films, across 53 years of directing. At an age when every film a man makes carries the implicit question of whether it will be the last. Eastwood has never been comfortable with that question. He said, in an interview that predated Christina's death, "There's no reason why a man can't get better with age." He said, "I don't deal with fate." Both statements are, in the most fundamental sense, the same statement. They are the declaration of a man who has always understood that the moment you begin negotiating with the idea of your own ending, you have already conceded something you cannot recover. He has never conceded it. Not at 70, not at 80, not at 93, when he was finishing a film in the months after the woman he loved died in the house they shared in Carmel by the sea. But the press does not always honor the position a man takes about his own narrative, and so Juror No. 2 was received in November of 2024 as a coda, as the final statement of a filmmaker who had earned the right to make it on his own terms, which he had, but who was understood to be making it for the last time, which remains unresolved. The critical response was, by most accounts, respectful. The film is a legal thriller about a juror who realizes mid-trial that he may have been responsible for the death at the center of the case he is being asked to adjudicate. It is, for those paying attention to the thematic through-line of Eastwood's directorial work, an entirely characteristic preoccupation. Guilt, moral accountability, the question of what a man owes the truth when the truth will cost him everything. He has been asking that question, in different registers, since Unforgiven. What distinguished Juror No. 2 from its predecessors was not its theme, but its reception context. It arrived into a world that was simultaneously grieving Christina Sandera on his behalf and constructing the narrative of his ending without his participation. The film itself was, in that sense, almost secondary to the story the press had already decided to tell about it. And Eastwood, who has never participated in the construction of narratives about himself that he did not control, offered nothing to complicate or confirm the farewell framing. He did not give interviews defending the film's status as a continuation rather than a conclusion. He did not appear on stages to accept retrospective tributes. He finished the film. He released it through Warner Brothers, and he returned to the silence in Carmel that had become, after July 18th, something heavier than it had been before. There is a specific detail about the period following Christina's death that surfaced through sources close to Eastwood in the weeks and months that followed. And it is a detail that deserves to be named with the dignity it requires rather than the spectacle that lesser coverage made of it. Sources described a visible physical change in the man. Weight loss that was significant enough to be noticed by those who had known him across the years. A greater degree of reclusiveness than even his baseline, which had already been considerable. Energy that had diminished in ways that were observable to the people around him. One source, speaking to the Spanish press in the months following Christina's death, said that Eastwood no longer seemed like himself, and that he was spending the majority of his time in seclusion at the Mission Ranch. The entourage around him, the family, the friends, the small circle of people who have always constituted his actual world rather than the public-facing version of it, reportedly hoped that he would find new anchors, new passions, new reasons to bring his attention outward rather than inward. This is not a story of collapse. That framing would be both inaccurate and unworthy of the man it describes. This is a story of a 93-year-old human being absorbing a loss of enormous personal significance at an age when the body and the spirit have already been in negotiation for years about what can still be asked of them. The physical signs that had been observed before Christina's death, progressive kyphosis noted since 2023, a withdrawal from public appearances that had already seen his last confirmed attendance at the AT and T Pebble Beach Pro-Am in 2022, did not disappear after July 18th. They continued, and they continued alongside the grief. Those are two separate things. They matter in their own right, and they matter together in ways that are difficult to separate when you are watching them accumulate in a man of 93. What came next, 6 months after Christina died, in the first public accounting of how Clint Eastwood was actually doing, was not a statement from Eastwood himself. It never is. It came from the person who has always served as the quiet intermediary between the legend and the world that cannot stop watching him. Scott Eastwood is 48 years old. He is the son of Clint Eastwood and Jocelyn Reeves, born in March of 1986 in Monterey, California, the same coastal county where his father has lived the majority of his adult life and where Christina Sandera died. He is an actor in his own right, with a filmography that includes Fury, Suicide Squad, and the longest ride. And he carries in his face and in his bearing an almost unsettling genetic fidelity to the man who fathered him. When Scott Eastwood speaks about his father in public, which he does rarely, and always with the same economy of disclosure that appears to be the primary inheritance of the Eastwood family line, the world pays attention in a way it does not when other celebrity children offer similar assurances about similar aging parents. It pays attention because Scott is not performing filial loyalty for an audience. He is, by every available indication, actually telling you what he knows. And what he knows, he measures carefully before releasing into the world. In January of 2025, 6 months after Christina Sandera died, Scott Eastwood spoke to People magazine. The exchange was brief. The content was, by the standard of celebrity health updates, almost aggressively unspectacular. And it was, for exactly that reason, the most credible accounting of Clint Eastwood's condition that the public had received since July 18th. "He's good," Scott said. "He's doing good. He's a survivor, a trooper." 3 sentences. 11 words of actual assessment. The word choices matter more than they might appear to at first reading, because Scott Eastwood did not say his father was thriving. He did not say the grief had passed, or that the physical changes that had been observed in the months following Christina's death had reversed themselves. He said his father was good. He said his father was doing good. And then he reached for 2 words that are not the words a son chooses casually about a 93-year-old father who has just lost the companion of his final decade: survivor and trooper. Both words carry the implicit acknowledgement that there has been something to survive. Both words are, in the quiet register of a family that does not perform its emotions for public consumption, a form of honesty that a more defensive or more image-conscious son might have replaced with something smoother and less revealing. Survivor. The word implies a threat that has been faced and not defeated by. It implies that the period between July 18, 2024 and January of 2025 contained something that required surviving, not merely enduring, not merely continuing, but actively navigating a force significant enough to warrant the word. For a man of Clint Eastwood's constitution, a man who has operated for 96 years on the principle that difficulty is not an excuse and that the work continues regardless of what the personal life is doing, for that man, the word survivor from his own son is not a casual reassurance. It is an honest acknowledgement that the 6 months following Christina's death were among the hardest of a life that has not been short on hard passages. Trooper. That word comes from the theater. It refers to a performer who continues, who stays in the production regardless of what is happening off stage, who honors the commitment to the work even when the personal circumstances make that commitment cost more than it ordinarily would. Scott Eastwood chose that word about his father deliberately, or he chose it instinctively, which amounts to the same thing in a family where language is not deployed carelessly. Either way, the word trooper about Clint Eastwood in January of 2025 is not a generic compliment. It is a specific recognition that the man has continued, that the work has continued, that the forward motion has continued, through a period when the reasons to stop were more present than they have been at any point in recent memory. 3 months after Scott's statement, in April of 2025, the family released a more formal public declaration. The language was measured, as it always is when the Eastwood Circle decides that a statement is necessary. "Clint is resting comfortably," the statement read, "focused on family and reflection." 4 words that, taken individually, are entirely unremarkable. Taken together, in the context of everything that preceded them, they are a portrait of a man at 94 who has pulled his attention inward, toward the 8 children and the grandchildren and the accumulated relationships of a life lived at a scale that most people never approach, and who is doing what men of his particular formation do when the external world offers less purchase than it once did. He is reflecting. He is resting. And the word comfortably, in a statement released by a family that does not use words carelessly, is doing significant work. It is the word that says, he is not in crisis. He is not failing. He is, in the specific and important way that the word comfortable allows, at peace with where he is. What neither Scott's statement nor the family declaration addressed, what neither could address, because it had not yet fully resolved into a confirmed fact at the time they were made, was the question of whether Juror No. 2 had been the final word, whether the 40th film was also the last film, whether the man who said he does not deal with fate had reached, finally, the point where fate had decided to deal with him instead. The answer to that question arrived not through a family statement and not through a son's brief assessment to a magazine. It arrived through the machinery of Hollywood itself, through the industry that Clint Eastwood has inhabited for longer than most of its current practitioners have been alive, and which has learned, across 7 decades, that announcing Clint Eastwood's ending before he has decided it is ending is a category of error with a very long and very consistent track record of being wrong. In 2026, the year Clint Eastwood turned 96 years old, Warner Brothers confirmed that he is in pre-production on a new project. The details of that project have not been made public in the way that most Hollywood productions announce themselves, with casting announcements and location reports and the steady drumbeat of industry coverage that precedes a major release. The confirmation exists in the quiet, institutional way that things exist when Clint Eastwood is involved, not as a press campaign, not as a managed rollout, but as a fact that the industry knows and that the world is permitted to know without being invited to make more of it than it is. He is working. He is preparing. He is, at 96 years old, in the earliest stages of making his 41st film. That sentence deserves a moment of stillness before moving past it. 41 films. Across a directing career that began in 1971, when Richard Nixon was in the White House and the Vietnam War had 4 more years to run, and the American cinema that Eastwood would help define was itself in the middle of the most turbulent creative decade in its history. He began directing when he was 41 years old, and he is now 96, and he is beginning again. The symmetry is not lost on anyone paying close attention. The man who started directing at 41 is still directing at 96. He has now spent more years behind the camera than most directors spend alive. And the film that the press called his farewell, Juror No. 2, released in November of 2024, 4 months after Christina Sandera died, was not his farewell. It was, in the most Eastwood manner possible, simply the second to last film completed before the next one began. He has outlived 2 marriages. He has outlived a decades-long relationship with Sandra Locke. He has outlived 10 years with Christina Sandera. He has outlived nearly every actor of his generation, the peers who stood beside him at the beginning of a Hollywood era that has now passed so completely into history that its participants are discussed in the past tense almost universally, the only exception being the man who is still, at 96, in pre-production on his next project in Carmel by the Sea. He has outlived the expectation of his own ending so many times that the press has quietly retired the farewell framing. Not because they have given up on it, but because they have been wrong about it with a consistency that eventually demands a different approach. The physical realities of 96 years lived in a body that has been asked to do what Clint Eastwood's body has been asked to do are present, and they are not hidden. The progressive kyphosis, the weight loss that sources noted in the months following Christina's death. The reclusiveness that has deepened as the years have accumulated, and the circle of people who share his specific memory of a specific era has narrowed. These are not secrets. They are not scandals. They are the honest ledger of a life at its outermost edge. The physical cost of duration, presented not as a spectacle of decline, but as the simple and dignified truth of what 96 years in a human body actually produces. He has never asked for sympathy about any of it. He would not recognize the request as one worth making. What Carmel by the Sea looks like for Clint Eastwood in 2026, on the other side of Christina's death, on the other side of the family statement about rest and reflection, on the other side of Scott's careful and honest assessment of a survivor and a trooper, is a life that has contracted in some dimensions and remained in the dimension that has always mattered most to him, entirely intact. The Mission Ranch is still his. The town is still his in the way it has always been his. Not as a possession, but as a belonging, the mutual kind, where the place and the person have absorbed enough of each other across enough decades that separation is no longer a meaningful concept. He walks, or he does not walk, through the property where Christina once worked as a hostess, and where the two of them built the quietest and most private version of a life that a man of his visibility has ever managed to construct. He is focused on family. He is focused on reflection. And he is, because he cannot be otherwise, focused on the next film. Christina Sandera was 61 years old when she died. She was 32 years younger than the man who loved her. She did not seek fame, and she did not receive it. Her name was known to the world only because it appeared beside his, and the world's knowledge of her was always filtered through the lens of who he was rather than who she was. That asymmetry is one of the quiet injustices of the life adjacent to legend. The way that a person of genuine substance and warmth, a woman described by Eastwood himself as lovely and caring, becomes a supporting character in a narrative that was already written before she entered it. She deserved a story of her own. The story she has, in the end, is the one that measures what her absence cost the man who is still here. And that cost, visible in the weight loss and the reclusiveness and the 5 words that were all he could offer the world on the day she left, is the most honest testimony available to the depth of what they had. He is 96 years old. He gave the world 5 words about the woman he loved, and then he went back to work. That is the only language Clint Eastwood has ever spoken, not because it is the easiest language, but because it is the only one he has ever trusted to carry the full weight of what he means. If this story moved you, leave a tribute below for the last monument standing in American cinema, and for the woman who stood beside him in the quiet years when no camera was watching. What does it mean to love someone for 10 years and say goodbye in 5 words? What does it tell us about the kind of strength that does not announce itself? The kind that simply continues long after everyone else has stopped expecting it to? Subscribe. Because there are more stories like this one, lives lived at the edge of what is humanly possible, told with the honesty they deserve. He has outlived 2 marriages, a decades-long relationship, a girlfriend of 10 years, and nearly every actor of his generation. He is 96 years old. And somewhere in Carmel by the Sea, on the ranch he rescued from demolition 4 decades ago, the last monument is still at his desk, still preparing, still working. That is Clint Eastwood. That has always been Clint Eastwood, and it appears against